Hey everyone, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. Now, as I said in my Into the Woods blog, fairy tales are one of the most popular stories that have been adapted many times in the media. And while many film companies, including Disney, have been making these classic stories in their own special ways, fractured fairy tales didn't make it big in animation until Shrek came along. Anyway, other than Hoodwinked and The Seventh Dwarf, which I looked at 2 years ago, there's one other fairy tale spoof that I've been interested in sharing with you. Released on January 5th, 2007, the movie is Happily Never After. So, let's get this story started. For many years, a wise wizard has worked hard to ensure that the scales of good and evil will always stay well balanced. But when the wizard goes on holiday in Scotland, his faithful assistants, Monk and Mambo, make a crucial mistake of allowing Cinderella's wicked stepmother, Frida, come into possession of their master's magical staff and cast a dark shadow of sorrow over fairy tale land. And now Ella must awaken from her romantic dreams to take on her fearsome stepmother with a little help from Monk and Mambo, along with her best friend Rick and a virtual army of heroic dwarves. So, what do I think about this movie? Well, this is another movie that I neglected to see in theaters, but after renting it from Netflix, I found it to be a decent movie, and the concept was pretty interesting. However, while it was a box office disappointment, this was another movie that became one of my top 13 bad films that I like. But before I get ahead of myself, let's move on to Mustang Notes. The film was directed by Paul J. Bulger, who was an animator on films like Pippi Longstocking, Ralph Bakshi's Cool World, along with Don Bluth's Rockadoodle and All Dogs Go to Heaven. Also, the film was produced by John H. Williams, who, after working on Shrek, founded Vanguard Animation and started working on projects such as Disney's Valiant and those stupid Space Chimps movies. And it was written by Rob Morley, who, a few years ago, wrote the screenplay for Gnome Alone for Netflix. As for the animation, well, in my eyes, it is kind of cheap, but at least the character designs look pretty decent. And since this movie takes place in fairy tale land, I want to give you guys a heads up that this won't be the only animated fairy tale spoof that takes place in a country with fairy tale in the name. Also, while the story is a bit all over the place, the concept is kind of interesting. Plus, there are several comedic moments, even if most of it is pop culture references. And I think the final climax is pretty dark and thought-provoking. And that's basically all I got from Mustang Notes, so let's move on to the characters and their voice actors. Let's begin with our main character, Ella, aka Cinderella, voiced by Sarah Michelle Gellar, who you may remember from TMNT and Scream 2. Ella is a beautiful scullery maid who, in my eyes, is brave, kind, and compassionate. And while she was in love with Prince Humperdink, she later realizes who her real true love is. Also, I just love the scene where Ella shoots rubies and diamonds at the witches, wolves, and trolls who were surrounding the seven dwarfs' home. Next we have Ella's best friend and the film's narrator, Rick, voiced by Sarah's husband, Freddie Prinze Jr., whom was with her in I Know What You Did Last Summer and the 2 live-action Scooby-Doo movies. Rick is a stressed-out servant boy who finds the prince as a grand annoyance. To me, Rick would have to be my favorite character in this movie, mostly due to Freddie's voice. Plus, I think Rick is brave, heroic, and his narration is pretty great, especially when he gives the audience a background on Fairy Tale Land and several important characters during the beginning. Next we come to the wizard's assistants, Monk and Mambo. Monk is a uptight, smart pig, voiced by Wallace Shawn, and Mambo is a rebellious and silly cat creature, voiced by Andy Dick. To describe these guys, well, Monk is the kind of character who seems very responsible, and he wants to avoid causing trouble with the fairy tale characters. And Mambo would have to be the most understandable, and he's the reason why the film's concept was interesting to me, due to him being bored with good endings all the time, and he wishes for things to go differently every once in a while. Thankfully, Mambo does relent when things get out of control. Overall, these two would have to be the most entertaining in the entire movie, and I like that they assist Ella and Rick to stop Frida from taking over Fairy Tale Land. Next is Prince Humperdink, voiced by Patrick Warburton. Unlike the prince from the Cinderella story, this prince not only has the same name as that prince from The Princess Bride, but he's somewhat lazy and ignorant, and he just follows the steps in a tiny little booklet that he carries around. And Humperdink can be a huge klutz. Next we come to the villain of the story, Ella's power-hungry stepmother, Frida, voiced by Sigourney Weaver, whom was in films like Ghostbusters, Holes, WALL-E, and The Tale of Despero. Frida easily takes over Fairy Tale Land by bringing the balance of good and evil on the scales, and takes the wizard's staff for more power. In my eyes, Frida is a really wicked woman, and Sigourney Weaver pulls off a fantastic villainous performance. Also, I like the scene where she rallies up several evil villains to do her bidding and wreak havoc on the kingdom. Finally, we have Rumpelstiltskin, voiced by Michael McShane, whom I remember from Tom and Huck, A Bug's Life, The Tower of Terror, and Final Fantasy X and X-2. This guy steals a baby from the miller's daughter after Frida tips the scales of good and evil, and later, Rumpelstiltskin joins Frida as her evil sidekick. In my opinion, Rumpelstiltskin is sinister, but also pretty silly. Plus, unlike other dumbass henchman characters, he is pretty stealthy while spying on Monk, Mambo, and Ella, and reports to Frida, whom he considers as the Empress of Evil, that they're searching for the prince. Also, at the same time, Rumpelstiltskin seems kind of caring towards the baby that he kidnapped, and at the end of the movie, he becomes the baby's uncle. Other voice actors in the film include John DiMaggio, Tom Kenny, Rob Paulsen, Cass Soucy, Trez MacNeille, Lisa Kaplan, and George Carlin. By the way, this was George's last animated film that he acted in, due to his death from a heart failure a year afterwards. Rest in peace, Mr. Carlin. And now, let's move on to my final words. Overall, while Happily Never After may not be the best animated fairy tale spoof in existence, I still found it to be an entertaining movie. The animation was cheap, true, but the story, while it had mediocre and all over the place, had an interesting concept in my opinion. Plus, it had decent comedy and good voice acting and entertaining characters. Also, I think it's a family movie that you might want to check out, especially if you have kids. As for my rating, I'll give it a 59% out of 100. It's not really bad, not really great either, just somewhere in between. Now, will I blog the sequel, Happily Never After 2? Well, absolutely not. Because that movie has nothing to do with the first movie at all, and the animation is on the same level as Video Brinquedo. Anyway, be sure to join me for my next blog, Mustang Power.